So good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening. I am Chitra Mukherjee, and on behalf of Team Chintan and our partners, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, FES, I'd like to welcome you all today for this discussion on plastics, the gap in circular economy. FES is a non-profit German foundation committed to the values of democracy and social justice. With this webinar series, FES would like to create a nuanced and progressive discourse for social, economic, and ecological transformation with gender justice and climate justice at its core. Today's webinar is part of our 6th webinar series, and many of you must have attended the last 3 that we've had. And today we are going to talk about the plastic challenge to circular economy. Plastics have seeped deep into our everyday lives, whether it is plastic tiffin boxes or bottles or mobile phones or electronic gadgets. And in these times of pandemic, we've also been introduced to a huge explosion of single-use plastic masks and PPE equipment. And all these products now are an integral part of our modern daily lives. Well, plastic industry claims that plastic products have made our lives easier. However, there is another side to the plastic's life. The toxins, the poisons, the persistent pollutants that are present in so many of the plastic products, and they leach and enter the human bodies, where they cause several diseases, including cancer. There are plastics that are termed safe for human beings, but these continue to wreak havoc in marine life and oceans. Their far-reaching impacts on human health and environment because of their toxic and indestructible nature makes it one of the big elements which makes circular economy impossible. So to discuss more on this are our panelists here, and I'll just briefly give you an idea of the format today, which is that our moderator will give you a brief idea about who our panelists are, who will then give us a brief presentation to share their perspectives. And then we'll open up the floor to give you an opportunity to ask specific questions. So do keep your questions, which will be collated, and we'll have this at the end of the entire session. The moderator for today's panel is Ms. Malti Gadgil. She has been working with waste pickers in Delhi and later became the CEO of Swachh Pune. She has also worked in HP in their sustainability department and initiated recycling and education projects for HP in Indonesia and Malaysia. She currently works as the Asia Program Manager with the Plastic Solution Fund. So it's over to you now, Malti.
Thanks, Chitra, and thanks everybody for attending this, the 4th of a 6-part series of webinars. I'm going to quickly introduce our first speaker for today, who is Dr. Thomas Lindquist. He has worked with environmental research and policy since 1984. His focus has been on environmental product policy and management responses to this. He has done substantial work on waste management, recycling, and prevention in Sweden, the EU, and the Nordic countries, in Canada, Argentina, India, China, Georgia, Ukraine, and several other countries. Besides working with academic research projects, he has also worked with the Swedish Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, coining the term EPR, coining the EPR principles in 1990, with OECD and Swedish Car Association developing their proposals for EPR system, and several other NGOs. He defended
Samuel, I think Malti must be having a glitch.
I'm here, Chitra.
Yeah, Malti. Can't see you, but yeah.
And so over to Dr. Thomas for the first presentation for today.
Thank you. I will now try to share the presentation with you also. And here we have it. So I'm very happy to be back in India, even if this is a kind of substitute of being in my home in Sweden and talking to you. I've always enjoyed very much to go to India, and I hope I will get new opportunities soon to be there in person. What I want to talk to you is about plastic and about EPR policy. But first, why did we end up where we are today? And one of the things we can say is that we have had a fantastic development of our society. And in many ways, it's been good development, but also difficult to handle sides of it. And one of these is the level of consumption. It's incredible how it has grown through my time. And many things have changed, but we haven't managed to change our waste management to the level we need to do, both when it comes to the consumption level and when it comes to the type of products we are throwing away today. Because you have to remember that we are throwing away things which we would never throw away, or we would throw away after decades of life. Those are now thrown away at a fairly rapid time, and we are using materials. I remember when I was young, plastics was a new material. It was totally different from today's society. When it comes to waste management, it has long been like this, that we have been good at recycling what we can recycle with profitability. And when we had more waste, which we started to get in the last 100 plus years, we made it the responsibility of the municipalities to take care of it. There was no market, nothing. So it was just to get rid of it. And plastics belong to these products, but didn't have any traditional recycling market. It didn't fit in to the waste management system. Let's say we have, until today, built our system on what is profitable. And then we have tried to raise enough money that we could take care of a bit of what is not profitable. But in many cases, we didn't manage. And it became two big compromises where we put it away somewhere where we couldn't see it, where it didn't make immediate harm, but also that we just threw it away into the nature, into the streets, into the sea. And that is what we are meeting today. It just has become too much. Now, can we rely on these municipalities to change? And I would say no, because in most cases, we have big problems to raise enough money to deal with all the duties we are getting. We need to get these resources from another place. And we need to deal with the challenge and the origin of the challenge. Now, in a sense, this is not new. I was in a country which is affluent in many ways where I grew up. And we were meeting these problems many decades ago. And around the end of the 80s, when I came into environmental research, it was becoming more and more evident for people working in the field that we need to do something. And I was asked by the Swedish Minister of Environment to make some strategies for the future. And in this work, I came up with the idea of EPR. So actually, it was written in Swedish first and then translated to English like a year or 2 years afterwards when we organized an international meeting. And what I've seen is that this was the right time. There were many people who were thinking in a very similar way and had ideas and made it become accepted in many countries in the following years. And it was translated to other languages. So what are we actually meaning? Well, if you look at the words, extended, it's not all, it's just more than before. So we are extending the responsibility. We are saying that we need the producer to be involved. So we are going from municipalities to businesses, and we are moving responsibility. And responsibility goes from who is paying, who is organizing, who is informing, and a few other things. So a new actor should come in and have a bigger role. And one of the reasons why we need the producer to be involved is that we need better products. We need products which have been designed and produced to fit into our waste management systems. Easier to take care of, easier to recycle, with better durability, better reuse and repairability. Once products are coming to the end of life, we need to collect them in an effective way. We need to treat them in a good way, and we need to return materials back to a new life. So it's rather evident that you need to do this in society. So it becomes a question, how do we do it in a good enough way? And what has happened is that the various producers, once they get responsibility, they join in producer responsibility organizations. They are paying these organizations so that they can organize tenders to find someone who could do the practical work. They are paying these operators and they are reporting. This is the idea of the present systems. And the operators, well, it's waste management companies, it's actors who have transport and recycling facilities. So the new thing is really to have these producer responsibility organizations which are channeling the responsibility. But things are not easy in reality. So we have met a number of problems. And plastics is the problem in many ways when it comes to materials. Disregarding this, what we have seen in the laws of the various countries is that we have fairly low demands for plastic. Many lawmakers seem to have been sitting and saying, oh, it's so difficult to take care of plastic. It's so difficult to recycle it. So we can't ask too much. And I agree. it is a material which is not easy to recycle. And maybe we should use less of it. And maybe we should spend more resources on this material when we have to another. And maybe that will be a reason for shifting over to other materials also. But the lawmakers have avoided this, and they are put, in all cases I've looked into, quite low demands for what should be collected and how it should be treated. And in many cases, we collect material in a mixture. And even if we are trying hard, at least in some cases we do try hard, the result of a recycling is materials of very low quality, and plastics is number one in this. What we get after the recycling processes has very limited, if any, market at all. On the other side, producers, because of these systems, haven't had to pay very much. It's been fairly cheap. And that means that the impetus, the reason for changing and maybe using other materials or finding new processes how to recycle has not been so big as we were hoping for. And then many governments, many environmental agencies have been very lax when it comes to really implementing the laws. And that has made it even less important for producers to lead a development. And we see a lot of cheating. It's a little bit cheating in all systems. There's a lot of cheating when it comes to many of the EPR systems, and not the least when it comes to plastics. PET bottles is something which have become leading on many markets when it comes to beverages. We in our country, in Sweden, we have a deposit refund system. In some countries, for instance, in South Africa and so on, you have a high return system with very high figures. If you are doing this collection in a good way, you are keeping the PET bottles apart from the others, we can return them into new PET bottles. And that's what we are seeing now. Even in this year, we saw the introduction of 100% recycled PET bottles on the Swedish market. So there are possibilities. There are possibilities with plastic, but you have to spend an effort on it. Now we have to have more brave governments. We have to have systems, laws which are demanding an effective collection and recycling of plastics. It's not that we are lacking technologies and so on. We are lacking the will to invest in this and spend the money on this. So now what we are doing when we are calling it recycling is to a certain level a dumping of plastic. Plastic sometimes into other products where it's not really making any sense. It might not be damaging in those products, but it's really not what I would like to call a recycling. Now, sometimes I meet from the side of industry a question saying that, why do you talk about us? we have not done anything wrong. We are just providing what consumers want. And I try to explain that I'm not putting blame on anyone. I'm just saying we have to find solutions to problems. And in order to solve problems, we have to allocate responsibilities in a way that we get the solutions. And here we need changes, and changes which mainly can be done by the producers. And that's what we have to go for. We have to create the incentive that we really see these changes coming. Now, coming up to the end, I want to give a good message also. And that is, we should believe in the possibility of change. And we should believe that technical development will help us. And that means that we should believe in new and more sustainable products. And some of this doesn't have to be very advanced. And I just want to give one example. I met so many people telling me that you can't, in a good way, recycle carton, beverage carton, and you spend too much effort. You are washing them and etc. So I went home from a meeting and made a photo how I and my wife, we are solving this problem of getting yogurt packaging clean so that you can recycle it. And we have one of the family members taking this task. And we are not throwing away any product. We are not throwing away any dirty packaging which can't be recycled. And I'm not telling you that you should all have a cat or a dog or someone doing this. I'm telling that there are solutions, and we need our creativity, and we need good approaches to find these. And let's see to that policies and laws are rewarding such changes and not making it more difficult. So thank you for your attention. And if you ever want to know something more about my university and our work, here you have our web address. So thank you for the attention again.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, for a wonderful presentation. Of course, while we work in the global south, we're painfully aware of the fact that there are innumerable number of waste pickers whose livelihood is often at stake. And a good EPR policy, of course, needs to be inclusive of many of the waste pickers who are working. The second issue really that comes to mind from the presentation is the issue of PET. That it's often quoted as one of the products for EPR, and yet I think products like sachets and wrappers, HDP, shampoo bottles are often neglected, and they are the ones who need more attention while designing an EPR system. But I'll leave you with those thoughts and move on to the next presenter for today. Rajesh Ayapilla is the Director of CSR and Sustainability for India and Southwest Asia. He has more than 2 decades of experience across various sectors related to environment, water stewardship, and sustainability. He has worked with multiple global MNCs and is also an ex-Air Force officer. He currently heads the CSR and sustainability work at Coca-Cola for India and Southwest Asia, and works in developing sustainability strategies around key focus areas, nurturing partnerships and implementation of CSR projects. So over to you, Mr. Rajesh, for your presentation.
Thank you, Manti. Just give me a moment while I share my screen. Yeah, is it visible to all?
Yes, Mr. Rajesh, it is.
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Professor Lindquist had brought in a very, very good perspective in terms of how a basic solution should evolve or pan out and what should be the role of industry. So what I would like to bring about here is the perspective of the industry, particularly with reference to the organization that I'm currently working in, and see how we have been able to implement some of the strategies which Dr. Lindquist had said into our own areas of work. So we are basically focusing our efforts into three critical areas, which we feel are very, very material to our operations. That is sustainable agriculture, water being a very, very important ingredient for our products. And the third one is a world without waste, where we are talking about packaging. And all these three activities, we are working with strategic partnerships along with other corporates, NGOs, social enterprises, and also communicating regarding all the efforts that we have been doing in, so that we can get more feedback and improve on the work that we are doing. So I will very briefly touch upon agriculture and water, and then subsequently we will talk about the world without waste. So when we are talking about agriculture, we have embarked on a journey which we call as a fruit circular economy, where we are looking at four buckets. The first one is the most important, is obviously the farmer, where as an organization, we are currently focused on supporting the farmer for implementing good agricultural practices, supporting them with financial support for seeds or samplings, or helping them to do new technologies like ultra high density plantations or drip irrigation, which all reduce water as well as improve the productivity of the fruit products. So this in turn results in improving the source products for the processing industry. They have much larger uptimes for the plants which are running, and they can also leverage more large scale processing technologies. This results at some point of time to the producers or the brand owners getting good sourcing of locally sourced products or fruit pulps. And this is what is actually leading into that entire circularity in this scheme of things. And of course, there is the last item related to market connectivity and for the communities. So this is a initiative which we had embarked upon almost like 10 years back, where we started off some work in the field of mangoes. Now we have actually expanded this work into other fruits. Currently, we are covering almost like 9 states, and we have embarked into fruits like oranges, apples, lychees, and grapes. And we hope that the work that we are doing here will actually catalyze a large scale movement in terms of the way horticulture is actually seen in this part of the country or the world. Moving on to water, we have been traditionally always focused in terms of the 4 R's, that is reduce, recycle, reuse, and replenish. Reduce, recycle, reuse are largely focused in terms of our manufacturing operations. As you can see, we measure the efficiency with which we use water in our manufacturing operations. And as you can see from the chart, it has come down from around 3.38 liters of water used to produce a liter of beverage product to around 1.74 liters. This is almost like a reduction of 30-35% over the past 10 years. We have also been focusing on other areas where we feel that through our interventions and our support, we can improve the quality of water usage as well as reduce the quantum of water which can be used. One is the sustainable agricultural improvements, which I covered a little bit in terms of the fruit circular economy. There are also the interventions related to access to safe and hygienic drinking water, which we can provide to communities which are currently deprived of that, integrated watershed development, and finally, aquifer recharge. We have been doing this as a system through our bottling partners, as well as through Anandana, which is the foundation that the Coca-Cola organization runs in India. As you can see, there have been a very large number of projects which have been undertaken by both these sections of the organizations, and cumulatively they have created almost like around 24 billion liters of water replenishment potential. So this returning back to the environment, the quantum of water that we use is what is our attempt to bring circularity to the entire issue of water. And as we speak today, we are currently around 119% water positive in our operations in this country. Moving on to plastics, the current state of plastics in our country is no different from what Dr. Lindqvist had mentioned. There are regulatory actions, there are perceptions with respect to what is the actual state and how the various stakeholders perceive the status of recycling or collection. There are operational challenges with the entire collection ecosystem, which is highly unorganized. There's an informal economy. The impact cannot be visibilized. And the most important aspect is with respect to the uh, education level of the consumers. How much do they understand about clean plastics that need to go into the recycling chain? Currently, in this country, when I'm talking that almost like 92% of PET gets recycled, it is going largely into these 3 or 4 categories. A large part of it is going into yarns, which goes into manufacture of textiles and fabrics. Some part of it goes into manufacture of straps and sheets, and a very minuscule part into others. So we as an organization, we do understand that the journey to circularity begins with the consumer, with proper waste segregation. And we are very keen in terms of partnering with various civil society organizations to improve the awareness level of the consumers. It's also a good thing that the current state of legislations in this country is also supporting that, and I can see a lot of that movement across many RWS where we go to take this message of segregation at source. When I initially mentioned about our global aspiration of a world without waste, we had basically divided it into 3 aspects or 3 pillars that we call it. One is called as the design pillar, the second is partner, and third one is collect. When we're talking about design, it is our aspiration that we should have 100% of the portfolio of packaging that we use that should be recyclable. And by 2025, at least 50% of the recycled material has to be used in all our packaging. We also intend to collect and recycle 100% of the packaging that we use by 2030. And we intend to do all of this through partnerships by bringing people together, by bringing all the necessary stakeholders onto the table. A little bit more about design. While there has been a lot of work to ensure that the portfolio of packaging is actually recyclable, we have also been working largely to ensure that our larger packaging footprint is reduced. One of the examples, as you can see here, is something which we call as the ASSP pack, or the Affordable Small Sparkling Pack. A 250 milliliter bottle of this pack currently weighs very, very less at almost like 9.6 grams, which is, I think, the lightest in the world, and giving still retaining the best consumer performance in its size. Coming on to circularity, there are various aspects which need to be considered. While we have this global and aspiration and ambition of ensuring that 50% of the material that we use into our packaging should be recyclable, there is also a necessity that there should be a facilitative legislative framework which ensures this. Currently in India, the regulations do not permit use of recycled content into packages which come in contact with food contact materials. And that is kind of like delaying our ambition to introduce recycled PET into our packaging in India. So there has been a lot of discussions about what kind of advocacy efforts, what kind of information campaigns can be raised and followed up so that the government can look at it in a little bit more facilitative manner. So these are a few of the steps which we had initiated towards that end. And we hope that the government would certainly take a positive view in terms of ensuring true circularity for the PET packaging in this country. Coming on to collect, as Professor Lindqvist mentioned earlier, it is a resource intensive process, and there is also the necessity to find collaboration among the various players in this category. But we have been kind of like, I would not say torchbearer, but taken the lead in creating certain programs for collection across the breadth and span of the country. As you can see from the maps here on the screen, we have been working towards development of material recovery facilities, or MRFs. So there are partnerships which are there with large global organizations with like UNDP. We have got partnerships with local NGOs like Sahas and Chintan and many, many more, which are actually facilitating this entire collection process in the country. And we have been seeing some very good results, not only in terms of the way collection is being facilitated, but also how these programs are actually working towards upliftment of the lifestyle or the economic status of the waste workers who are into this ecosystem currently. There have been a number of partnerships. I'm just quoting here a couple of examples. Like we have a volunteer program with the Afroz Shah-led Date with Ocean Foundation, which does a large number of beach cleanup activities in and around Mumbai. We are also working towards this educating the consumers in terms of the necessities of source segregation. There is a program called as Alag Karo, where you can see the outreach which we have achieved till date. And as we talk, we are also getting into the phase 2 of this program. Karo Sambhav is the producer's responsibility organization, which has come into being as a result of multiple discussions with various stakeholders across the government, across the industry. And this is what I think Professor Lindqvist was also alluding to when he was talking about how a collaborative approach and a PRO is the most optimal solution towards working towards adequate EPR. So this is how the journey began. It was launched somewhere in September 2019, where leading firms came together and stated their intent to form a public producers responsibility organization. And as we talk today, this organization has started its ground operations with one MRF which has come up in Goa. And as we talk, there are a number of other projects which are happening and in the pipeline, and we hope to see a lot of traction and progress on this aspect. So the technical arm or the legal arm of this Karo Sambhav organization is called as Circular Sustainability Solutions Private Limited. The goal is to collect and send to recyclers equivalent quantities as per the prevailing rules. The most important aspect here is to develop scalable solutions and processes create rules of collaboration among the stakeholders, ensuring a clean, transparent operation mechanism which the producers own and they can control, and set fair pricing so that the organization thrives and sustains, but it is also at a price which is transparent and visible to all the players into this organization. And we have been focusing a lot of attention and energies into ensuring that this operation really takes off and we start to see deliverable results. So that's all I had to share. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Rajesh, for a thought-provoking presentation. Just wanted to say a few things before we move on to Rachna. And one of them is that we're really focusing here on circular economy. And the question that the presentation and the work done by Coca-Cola throws up is that, is this level of ambition enough to really truly sort of solve the issue of plastics? Coca-Cola is one of the biggest producers in terms of volumes of plastics in the world, at 2.9 million metric tons of plastic produced every year. And there are several mandatory and voluntary commitments that the company has made, but unfortunately in the global south, where it's where the enforcement of certain regulations remains low, I think just really focusing on the end of life kind of solutions could end us in a lot of problems. The second is that we really only look at recycling as the only solution or the only way we can achieve circular economy. A big portion of circular economy also has to do with reduction as well as reuse. And unless there is a reuse component, and the innovation is brought in now, I don't know whether 5 or 6 years down the line, we're going to be able to bring it to market. So I think a little bit more focus, a little bit more ambition around solving the problem of plastics remains a crucial element to think about. Having said that, and of course, I think there are many people who are questioning whether PET to fiber is really the best way of going, because it is currently one of the biggest and possibly the only recycling which is done in India. I completely hear on the regulations, Rajesh, but there may be other ways of doing this. And of course, it's slightly disappointing that Coca-Cola has also said that they will not be doing away with the plastic bottles because the market demands it, and therefore they remain. So I think there needs to be a little bit more ambition. We'll leave it at that and move on to the next presenter for today. Dr. Rachna Arora is our next presenter, who is a team leader of the Circular Economy Solutions to Marine Litter project by GIZ, and the deputy team leader of European Union of the Resource Efficiency Initiative. She has been working with GIZ since 2007 under the bilateral projects of the European Commission and the partnership projects with the private sector, with relevant ministries and government departments. She has been supporting the government of India on policy formation and its implementation, particularly on electronic waste management, resource efficiency, construction and demolition waste, and circular economy. She is a TEDx speaker on circular economy. She has a doctorate degree in environmental chemistry from IIT Roorkee. She's a member of the task force and interdepartmental committee set up by Niti Aayog on resource efficiency strategy implementation in India. She's also part of the research and development committee set up by the Department of Information Technology and Communications by the Government of India on electronic waste management. She's also a working group member of the FICCI Circular Economy Group, constituted in 2017 to support industry research and dialogues on circular economy. So over to you, Dr. Rachna Arora.
Thanks, Malti. And I think it was quite a long one for an introduction. And I would like to thank Chintan as well for inviting me here, because I'm really glad to hear Dr. Lindquist, because he has been reading across his work since the thesis and all that he showed, starting from the EPR EVS discussion. And I'm really privileged to hear him. So thanks for this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today as well as it goes, and the chat messages and 100 participants at this time, especially for India, is really a great interest on the topic. Let me just share my screen for a minute. Yeah. Okay. Let me know if you're able to see the screen. Yes. So yeah, I think being a third speaker, there's already a lot that has been mentioned, but I'd just like to highlight few of these data and figures, because the way I would look at plastics is where I think Malti ended with this question of some of the fundamental flaws, because currently the need for circular economy actually brings out a lot of different perspectives rather than just looking on plastics and a material with a recycling value. So considering that, I would just say, first of all, that plastics is a byproduct from a fundamental flaw of how linear economy works. And there are several other examples to kind of just bring it forward. So this is some of the data which has been recently put forward by the researchers. And I think the current aggregate plastic packaging value is actually where a lot of material resources are actually shortened, considering that it has a short single-use cycle. So if we were just to focus on the total mismanaged waste, the current metrics, which is from, say, the 2016 metrics, where it's close to 91 million metric ton, which is 41%, by 2040 is visualized or calculated to be around 240 million metric tons. Now, this entire growth trajectory is because if we just continue to have a business as usual, where the annual flow of this plastic is actually, the end point is the oceans, because a lot of mismanaged plastic is where it is actually ending up in the oceans, whether it's from the land or from the rivers, it actually runs off to the oceans. And I think that's what the problem is. And one of the lowest value product on this is the sachet, and I term it as sachet economy. And I think this is where a lot of changes, especially the design changes, needs to come in place, because we're still not certain of how sachet in an economy works. We're just still looking at designing circular approaches as such. So I think this mismanaged municipal solid waste in developing countries especially is a big issue, where almost 50 to 70% of this waste with this growth trajectory actually ends up in oceans. And considering that the single-use plastic product, whether we call it about PET, and I think very recently I heard in one of the webinars, it's actually gone down to 16% of recycling globally. Now, this is what puts a lot of pressure on the product, like even as PET, with even in high income countries, the recycling rates are actually coming down for several reasons, including the pandemic as such. So this is, of course, a global problem. And again, few data, Dr. Lindquist mentioned that it's, and I think that was one of the key takeaways from me, that LCAs and this will not actually solve the problem, because for plastics, it's very visible. We need to there's no other kind of alternative to just think about a change. And I think that's what everyone at least is looking at. So whether we look at the global systemic changes that's on there, or whether we look at the recent report which came out through FICCI last week in the last month in the Circular Economy Symposium, the levers are more or less similar, when it comes to the circular economy approaches: reduction, substitution, recycling, disposal, and mismanagement. In terms of the Indian scenario, they've actually tried to look at the economic opportunity where the material value loss could actually be improved if any of these three levers are applied, when it comes to dematerialization or design towards the barriers which are there for recyclability, for instance, the single-use plastic packaging, or lightweight packaging. The liver 2, which is proposed, is extending the useful life or through reuse, where a lot of take back mechanisms, especially from the business to consumer segment, needs to be strengthened further. And of course, looking at standardization and other tools which can actually enhance the liver 2 when it comes to the economic as well as the social potential. The liver 3 comes to the improvement in collection and recycling mechanisms. So this actually puts fund the principle of EPR, as well as looking at end market approaches where the take back mechanisms could actually be established in a better manner. And I think this was just starting a dialogue, and then of course the pandemic that's happened. So a lot of this has actually gone back and put the entire thing on a kind of a back burner, because I think the reuse platforms, the sharing platforms, not only just on plastics, on textiles, on steel or aluminum, these sectors which was coming through has actually put an entire pause to the market. And especially if you look at the companies where of course there was a intent to come up with the reusable cups or looking at alternatives to single use was to be launched in this year more or less. But because of the pandemic, a lot of this has been actually pushed back. And I think this is where the delay or the slow transition to the sustainable lifestyles as well as circular approaches still needs to see the commitment majorly from the brands. A lot of data is there, but we are still missing this data from India. I'm just presenting something which I read from Singapore, where just in the lockdown, being an island city, the kind of discarded plastic waste which was generated only from packaging and food delivery alone during the lockdown is exponential. And I think this is all across Europe, this is all across, which is very, very visible. And of course, looking at the not just the recyclability, but also looking from the informal economy, that now with the pandemic, the rates have gone down, as well as the issue of touching this material by anyone and the threats that it poses to the human health is a big issue. And I think that's where we need to look at this challenge in a much more pragmatic way. And to put it, I think on recycling, I just have this one slide, because I think recycling on circular economy is just not enough. Because if you were to just consider recycling globally, the circular economy gap report clearly puts out that only 9% of the global or the recycling is actually uh, only 9%, which actually puts this primary production as one of the major issue. That's just a kind of a limited arrangement. What needs to be there, the plastics of course cannot be infinitely recycled. It's not like aluminum, it's not like steel. The inherent toxicity and the additives, so just saying that it will be a recyclable is a myth. And I really like this work that Chintan did about this entire notion of 90% PET bottle recycling, and how this material is actually not recycled, but it is actually downcycled, considering the financial as well as the material losses. So this entire dialogue, I think, needs much more informed discussion, especially in developing economies, because rather than looking at plastics, recycling, because recycling would of course need more material. If you want to push in more material for recycling, you're actually not circular. Similar to the waste to energy plants, where the plants would need more and more waste. So you're actually not following an approach of reduce or reuse, but you're actually focusing largely on the recycling stage. In the Indian setup, of course, as I mentioned, in 2018, the single-use plastic ban was announced. But of course, with this, the back burner that has happened is actually quite critical to look at how the informal sector, how the national framework recently in this year, the implementation of EPR guidelines was put forward with a very, very strong third-party monitoring mechanisms. And we also just heard from Rajesh about the launch of this Karo Sambhav and the private limited company. These kind of different third-party monitoring mechanisms will need much more robust frameworks, and not just an implementation guideline, but different mechanisms to look at how these ambitious goals, the solutions at the local level with the municipalities still needs to be brought forward. And I think the key to all the principles, and as Dr. Lindquist mentioned about waste segregation, that's the key. And if we are not following it, of course, we are just missing quite a lot of dialogue on this, talking about a material value and the better segregated waste as such. for the companies. Then, of course, I think this EPR guidelines still to come in a form, but it needs an entire awareness creation gap, capacity gap, as well as inclusive business models with the informal sector workers. And of course, implementation in India still remains to be a big challenge, whether it was the ban or whether it's the current way the plastic waste and other kinds of household waste, which also has now a larger component of PPEs and other consumables, is being discarded in the way in the mixed stream. There are two initiatives currently which I am involved in, as Malti just mentioned. As a part of this work under the EU REI, we were actually supporting the Indian government to come up with a national resource efficiency policy. This policy, and we are currently comparing this policy to the EU circular economy package. Now, this the policy was intended actually to have different government departments and inter-ministerial kind of a mechanism set up, looking through across the life cycle stages. So actually to put up an entire systemic thinking when it comes to the institutional structure on national, on resource efficiency as well as circular economy dialogues, and also look at policy instruments with regard to construction as a sector, plastics and packaging, electronics, agriculture, material, both renewable as well as renewable sources like photovoltaics, textile, food, and others. But if we were to compare this to the EU circular economy package, of course, it looks at the entire transformational change, especially with regard to now the European Green Deal, which was announced, and the green recovery, which has been put forward after the COVID pandemic. So the main focus remains on a sustainable product policy framework, as well as sectoral value chains, which in the fact sectors, as you can see, are still common as compared to the Indian National Resource Efficiency Policy Framework. So this work is still in progress, and we are still to see the resource efficiency policy coming finalized by the Ministry of Environment soon. You can follow the work that we do under the EU REI. But especially with regard to plastics, something that we were supporting, we kind of facilitated as a support to a startup. And I'm sure Malti was involved in setting up this very, very innovative, inclusive business model where you just see an entire kind of a transition from the current material which an informal sector worker is collecting, and how this material is actually recycled. The HDPE plastic is actually recycled and converted into 3D printing technology. And the entire shift with regard to the value of this, or I would say a value added product that the informal sector collected through social seva and through proto print are actually developing. Now, as a project, what we supported was to actually kind of make this share it across a bit with the different EU member states, and also make this model applied them, link them to the a European partner like Adelphi. And this year they're actually got a switch funding, Switch Asia funding as well. So next 3 years they will be actually working on this and supporting this transition, not only just in Pune. The interest also lies in actually taking it up to other cities. So we would be really interested to see if there's any scope or collaboration with other kind of cooperatives like Chintan or other work which we can support, align with the informal sector workers here in different cities. This is a new kind of a project which I'll be working on, but currently this is two projects which have been financed by the German Ministry of Environment. The two projects actually look at circular economy solutions. One of them actually looks at technological approaches and to support the implementation of EPR with the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change as a key partner. The other looks more from the cities approach, looking at marine litter prevention in cities, especially in coastal areas and riverine ecosystems, where the key partner is Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Now, with both the projects, the central role is not just working with the government. For the government, of course, it's a lot of policy related and other capacity development issues, but the work is to be designed together with the private sector, especially to look at upstream changes, work on business models with engagement to the informal sector, and also create a regular dialogue with the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Housing on topics which are kind of a common interest to both, especially EPR and circular economy. So through this project, what we would try to start, and this project got commissioned this year in September, it runs to 2023. So we have three key results looking at providing technologies to actually track and monitor litter in three of the cities, three of the states where we work. Then also to look at implement EPR mechanisms from starting from reduction, reuse and recycling of plastics. As I already mentioned, working with private sector, working with informal sector workers, and look at an entire multi-stakeholder approach, starting from CPCB and state pollution control boards with the three states where we work, and also with the municipalities. So looking at the readiness of EPR systems, and of course the responsibilities of stakeholders across the value chain to be supported further. Then of course looking at the EPR guidance mechanism, policy briefs, and the plastic credit trading scheme. Yeah. Just I think listening to the other two speakers, I would just bring in this perspective from the circular economy lens, that of course I think looking at now the work of course that we also did, or the RE policy, the draft RE policy from the Ministry of Environment was before the COVID situation. So now that response also needs to be aligned so that the consumers, if for instance on single-use plastics especially, the consumer awareness and engagement, which is looking from resilience point of view, so that the single use, currently what's happening is more just remains as a temporary measure, and we don't go back to the 2018 where we're still using a lot of single-use plastic. So try to bring that behavioral change still, and not just take the pandemic as a response towards this entire issue with the single use and more of safety and contamination and all of that. Secondly, I think we have worked with a lot of innovators across different kind of materials and in automobiles, in electronics and plastics and all. I think the circularity has many different angles and lenses, and we need to embrace that, and especially the policymakers need to take it into consideration when it comes to taking up these policy shifts and looking at that entire market transformation, because many times the products are quite innovative, but they don't find that space or niche in the market because of different hurdles, different issues which come into picture. So that's why I think this innovation is key when we need to move forward with the circular economy solutions, and also look at reduction upstream on these value chains. Then I think the trade policy, both at the national as well as international levels, need to look at non-fossil fuel plastic substitutes, because I think this is what is the major issue when it comes to recycling plastic. Is a value and the cost is so less that it's actually, yeah, I think just keep following the virgin plastic route is the easiest solution. So this needs to be kind of brought forward to the trade policy issue. And I think especially with the COVID responses, the support to the informal sector workers needs to be strengthened further, because I think this has entirely disrupted the chain which was existing across cities, across the country. And I think this needs to be completely thought through and brought in practice, because anyways it was a very well functioning system in few cities and was coming up in several other places, especially with the ban on single-use plastic and other issues. It could be nurtured forward, but I think now when we talk about the COVID response, it still needs to be brought into the mainstream, and better engagement and dialogue needs to happen with the informal sector workers in an informed and explicit form. Then, of course, I think the role of standards is key. And in our work with the EU REI project, we're actually trying to support some of these European standards on different materials. And I think on plastics, the use of this cradle-to-cradle approach on plastic packaging would actually be taken up, because there's a lot of work that's happening in the Europe. And of course, these are international brands. They're also looking at this kind of certification, so that the shift is actually really closed loop when it comes to production, and also looking at these kind of standards which look more towards the sustainable consumption approaches as well. So yeah, I think this is the last. So thank you very much. Thanks for your interest.
Thank you, Dr. Rachna. Another wonderful presentation. And just a few thoughts before I hand over the microphone to Samuel. One thing that has come to light in the last year, or maybe a little bit more, or has always been there and it is now suddenly becoming more evident, is that it is unfortunately a market that is almost entirely run by the supply side of plastics. The heavy subsidies that the petrochemical industries are receiving at the moment to keep them going is going to further cripple any efforts that will be done on the demand side. So even if we get several people to reject the overconsumption of plastics while it is being produced cheaper and cheaper with government subsidies, it becomes very difficult for the market to reject them. So I think that is another thing which needs to be taken into account when we're talking about circular economy, is that a deluge of plastics, just an exponential increase in plastics, cannot be supported by either solid waste management solutions, as Dr. Lindqvist has said, through EPR schemes or any kind of recycling schemes that come up. So that is one of the things which I would like some of the panelists to sort of talk about, is how upstream do we need to go in order to really break this chain of plastics that we have got ourselves into. There are several questions, and I want to quickly give the floor over to Samuel, who has collated. None of the questions have been dismissed. They will be answered. So over to you, Samuel.
Thank you, Ms. Gadgil, for clearing that out. I could see a lot of commotion in the chat because of the questions being dismissed. Please be ensured that all your questions will be asked. So I would request all the panelists to unmute themselves and also open their videos. So my first set of questions are addressed to Dr. Thomas. So Siddharth Singh, who is a deputy manager at Center for Science and Environment, asks a very relevant question. Given the fact that plastic waste in India is either downcycled or upcycled rather than being recycled, in your opinion, is circular economy possible for single-use plastics like multi-layered packaging and similar products?
I always find it very difficult with words like upcycled. So disregarding that, I think we can do a lot, and we know how to do it. We have known it for decades now. We can divide the molecules into smaller, into monomers, and we can rebuild a plastic. If we want to do this, we can take almost any plastic, but the price of doing it will depend on what we have done before. So it's not impossible. It will just cost at various levels. Some will be cheap, others will be more expensive. What has happened in Europe, where we discussed this quite a lot in the 90s, when you started to get more legislation in place, is that we have more or less forgotten about it. It's repeated from time to time by some very often industry representatives, but we are working on it. But we have to decide, should you continue to work on it for decades, or will we actually do something in this area? So if we really want it, we can do it. But I also think that I was probably a little bit too quick and didn't mention that recycling, and I mean both down and upcycling or whatever you call it, is not the only thing we have to do. We have to go for durability of products. We have to go for quality of products. We have to go for reuse and repairability. And this goes for all types of products. We have been neglecting that to a large extent. I see signs that the discussion is coming back, especially in the area of e-waste and electronic products in Europe. And I hope and believe that we will see a development of this area in the coming years. But yes, we can deal with plastics if we are prepared to put in the resources.
Right. Thanks for that answer, Dr. Thomas. Pretty similar to what you said. The second question addressed to you is, which out of plastics and electronic waste is more hazardous and more difficult to handle, and why, in the lens of circular economy?
Oi, that's the type of questions I prefer not to answer. I think we have no choice. We have to address both. We have built a society we can't manage without packaging, we can't manage without electronic products. We have to deal with both. Acute toxicity is more likely to come from the electronic products, of course. We all know that. But you also have the problems coming out of volume and filling up our rivers and etc. So they are both very, very important to deal with.
Right. The last question for you, Dr. Thomas, is, are there any upcoming recycling technologies that are maybe still not scaled up to an industrial level and currently in the works, or materials, for example, bio-based plastics, biodegradable plastics, that you think can be part of the solution?
Well, I'm sure there are a lot of technologies there which we haven't scaled up. Some of them will be very useful if we did. Others will fail. I mean, this is part of a technological development. But we haven't had enough pressure to try many of the technologies. It simply haven't been asked by us as a society, as producers, as responsible. So yes, there is a lot of technology which would be very useful to get in the right scale, and many of the things will be quite expensive initially, but with time, we know that the prices will go down drastically. We just have to pass this stage. So yes, let's try to do more. It's out there.
All right, thank you, Dr. Thomas. My next question is addressed to Mr. Rajesh. So the question is asked by Druhi Vaid, who is a PhD student in the University of Manchester. She asks, is the PET fiber recyclable too, the one which you referred in your presentation? If yes, do cloths, carpets made from PET fiber actually end up getting recycled, or are they dumped into landfills, or are they incinerated? What are the challenges to recycling PET bottles back into the PET bottles instead of fiber?
Yeah, so that is where the whole concept of linearity or circularity might become pertinent to us. Because when Rachana told about downcycling, or at what stage a material is no longer considered economically feasible for further recycling, can become very, very important to us. But having said that, coming to the point of what actually prevents a bottle-to-bottle recycling for a food contact material, I think currently there is no limitation, because from what I understand, while I'm not a purely technical person, the technologies that are available, they are quite supportive of allowing that. And as we can see that from examples from across the globe, where in many countries where this is currently happening, it's only a matter of having the right set of specifications, the right set of controls in place to ensure that this is done in an ethically and scientific manner. That is what should help the entire process.
Right. A question which is pretty much on the same lines. As mentioned in your presentation, most of the plastic recycling goes to the textile industries. We would like to understand how the challenge of microplastics is addressed when plastic is incorporated in textile materials and fabrics.
All right. So the topic of microplastics, while it's I would say quite recent. There is still a lot of research that is happening in terms of what are the sources and what are the impacts it can cause to the environment and how it can enter the food chain, and a lot of discussions are happening. I think at this point of time, it is important for us to realize that any leakage of plastics into the environment can probably issue of microplastics. So our intent should be to prevent those leakages. Our effort should be to stop that and get as much of plastics as possible back into the recycling stream so that they don't end up into the environment. That's most important for us.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Rajesh, for those answers. Dr. Rachna, my first question for you is, if not through recycling, how do you push for circularity in the plastic sector? This question has been asked by Meher Kaur, who is from Terry.
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned, recycling is, of course, I think very clearly mentioned as the last stage. But considering that there is this entire new delivery models, which looks at actually lesser plastic packaging or packaging material to be used. For instance, there are zero waste shops which are introduced, and I think they are also coming up now in India, where you actually have more role or scope for refill kind of solutions, not for all, but at least for soap. There is an alternative now available. No? You can actually get your. So I think elimination is one point where reduction needs to be really come, and I think that's where the industry needs to take a lead. That what exactly makes the kind of a business sense, and also considers this entire reuse options as well. So yeah, I would say this. We had one of this company also present in the FICCI, like Ample Pack, where even the like aluminum as a packaging product is used rather than just using plastic, where the cost is pretty high, but that's an investment, and that's a like company's choice. So whether you want to sell it as refillable or whether you want to use still sachets or other different kind of single use.
Right. Dr. Lindquist, I would like to come back to you for one question. The question is asked by Dr. Shamla Mani, and she asks us, in your opinion, to take back plastics and make them into petrol or diesel by reverse catalysis, method to address the issue of toxicity and contamination. What are your opinions on that?
I must confess, I'm not an expert in what problems this will solve and whether it will create any new problems. I think it's important that we try to keep the circles running as much as possible to similar products. Then when we can't do that, we will have to go for something else. And this might be one of the ways. You have to go for someone who is more an expert in this area to judge this.
Right. Thank you for that answer. Coming back to Dr. Rachna, as mentioned in your presentation, what are the go-to market hurdles which are usually faced?
I'll go back to the example, say for instance, of proto-print that I mentioned, right? Now that entire business model runs on making a high value added uh, filament, but this filament cannot be sold in the market without certification. So I think that's one of the key bottlenecks as well, no? which remains. That of course you can prove a technology, you can set up a business model, you can have a collection mechanism and create a business logic to this entire approach of shifting from the HDPE plastic to making a 3D filament. But that filament needs an entire process mechanism when it comes to certification and standardization. So these are, I think, some of the key bottlenecks which are there. And of course, the awareness within the consumers. No? A lot many times, and I did mention about this role of consumers in taking a decision. So I also see one of the questions which is about what kind of plastics and toxicity and all of that. So I would just say, at least hearing to the look at, we are not clubbing all the plastic from products which are designed to end rather than products which have a higher durability and could have a better usage at the design stage.
Right. I think, Dr. Rachana, we couldn't hear the last 15 seconds.
Okay, Can you hear me now clearly?
Yeah, it's much better.
Okay. Yeah. So I was just mentioning that I think the products need to be designed with higher durability. That's one of the asks. We're not looking at putting or clubbing all the sorts of plastic into one stream, but looking at that, you're just asking for durability. You're just asking for certain single use, which is a complete no-go. That's what is the ask. And of course, a better management systems where waste is so segregated that there are certain waste streams where EPR mechanism needs to come in picture, not just from recycling, but a lot of reuse and refillables and other options that need to be come through as a business model, not just as an environmental solution per se.
Right. My next question is for the whole panel. I would request everybody to unmute themselves. Is recycling of PET cheaper than making PET from original raw material? Anybody who would feel comfortable answering that?
I think you have to say cheaper for whom?
I believe the question asked by the person who has asked this question is in terms of the producer.
All right, I will try to get a perspective around that. If you really look at the way the pricing of recycled PET versus virgin PET has been making a shift across the years, there has been, I would say, an evening out in terms of the pricing, that they are almost at par sometimes. But having said that, looking at the overall responsibility of an organization or a business towards the environment, we also need to consider if there is an additional cost which comes in, how that can be kind of like absorbed into the cost of the product.
Right. The other question for the whole panel. So what is the rate of migration of chemicals from recycled plastic packaging to the items which the packaging contains when compared to virgin plastic packaging? So any thoughts on that? I could repeat the question if the question isn't clear.
I think that you can't answer that without having more details about what is the recycled plastic, what processes has it gone through, and etc. And what we see is that there is more and more work on trying to find standards which would put the risk into a reasonable level. And you wouldn't have allowed recycled PET to be used for bottles if the researchers and the scientists in this area didn't feel that you can be comfortable with that. We have now, for instance, it's actually Coca-Cola who introduced the 100% recycled PET bottle in Sweden in this year. So we have it on the market. I can go out and buy it in the shops. I would not feel that I'm taking any risk with that. So you have to do it in a scientific way, and you have to be careful because you could do wrong, of course. But I think we have capacity to do it right. And it will not create problems as long as we follow rules.
Yeah, and I think exactly for this, that's why in India, it's not allowed. We cannot use a lot of it for food grade packaging back into the process. No? That's why it's not allowed, because it can still have challenges with regard to different plastics which can be mixed.
Right. And a follow-up question to that, which has just been asked to the whole panel, would be the other materials that we talk about in the whole concept of circular economy and moving away from plastic, materials like aluminium, copper, or any other metal. Is there any associated toxicity with that as well? Dr. Rachna, Dr. Thomas, Mr. Rajesh, anybody could answer this.
I mean, you can do everything wrong. So of course you could do it wrong with these materials also. And we do have 100% recycled aluminum cans also. And if you are treating them in the right way and you are doing the right processes, yeah, it's not a problem. We have had it for decades now. And I think you can count all different types of materials and you'll say, yes, do listen to science, do listen to our experts in this area and follow what they have said you need to do to minimize the risks. I don't think we can do it better. I mean, there are risks with everything, whether it's recycled or virgin. So in all cases, we have to be careful. And there might come new knowledge and we will find out that something we have done for decades or centuries is not a good idea. You can go back in time and find out that the Roman Empire should not have to care less with water pipes. And they would maybe have continued for a longer time. So those things we have to look up with, and we have to trust science in this.
All right, anything else which Dr. Rachna or Mr. Rajesh would like to add?
Yeah, no, I think it needs more of scientific research, but I think it depends on what material you're talking about in packaging, what kind of what's the packaging option that we are referring to. So of course, as Dr. Lindqvist mentioned, associated toxicity with plastic, of course, if the plastic is certified, is less. And I think the example that I mentioned about the cradle to cradle packaging, for instance, even if it's a 3-layer packaging, the adhesive that is used could actually be non-toxic. That makes recycling easy. That makes the packaging material less toxic. So that's I think what's the differentiation, which will be a cost, as was mentioned by Professor Lindqvist. It's an additional cost, and it depends whether there is an investment on this kind of a cost in the design itself, during the design stage itself.
All right, that's it from my side. Those were the questions which we had for the panel. Over to you, Ms. Mukherjee.
Thank you so much. That was great. We had a wonderful discussion and great questions. I just want to make Chintan's, we've had some questions by the participants asking for Chintan's stand on plastics. And I just want to reiterate that what Chintan really thinks is that it's not all plastics that we are targeting, or we say that plastics don't have a use in modern day life. There are plastics which are used in medicine, which are used in pharmaceuticals and all of that, which we are not talking at the moment of that. We are putting a lot of emphasis on single-use plastics. And we believe that it has to be handled in a two-way stage, that we first look at we look at the low-hanging fruit like plastic bags or stirrers or flexi banners, and look at ways of easing that out, and look at safe non-plastic alternatives to that. And those that do not have an alternative, we might want to think of phasing it out altogether, because that's what the Prime Minister of India has pledged, that the country will phase out single-use plastics by 2022. So if sachets don't have a non-plastic alternative, maybe we should not consider single-use plastic sachets in the first place. And the second is, of course, once we deal with this, we can look at the more complex plastics, how to deal with that. And EPR, as Dr. Lindqvist has talked about, is so important in this entire strategy. And another thing is, of course, the informal waste pickers. And we have about 40,000 informal waste pickers in Delhi alone, and about 17,000 small units that are working informally in plastic recycling. And they actually are able to handle a lot of the plastics that get leaked into and kind of slip past the recycling. And we should see that they are legitimized and there is space for them to work. And that is so important. And so, yeah, I think that is our stand, that let's first attack the single-use plastics, look at those things that we don't need and create a behavioral change. So thank you so much. That was, I think, a fantastic discussion. Thank you all panelists. And thank you, the audience, for staying with us for this great discussion. We have 2 more upcoming webinars coming up to continue our discussion on circular economy. And the details, of course, as usual, we'll post it on social media. The next one is on 25th of November. And we will discuss how our cities can retrofit for circular economy and livelihoods. So please do join us on these dates, 25th and the 3rd of December. Thank you again and have a great evening.